everybody, and thanks for coming out to listen. One thing I thought I'd go over with you guys, because everybody's got slightly different backgrounds of working with Smartabase, is just give you a bit of background so you can put me in a frame of reference. Back in 2012, On the Podium and Sport Canada got a Canada-wide license for Smartabase and tried to cram all of the sports through and all of the athletes without really thinking through the strategy that carefully. So the end product was we had it worked for some sports, it didn't work for other sports. And going back to Marcus's original 4 key points is, we had a resource drain of like, how are we going to put this in play and is it actually going to work? Some sports had champions who went out there and said, oh my God, this is going to be amazing, we can make this work. We had a bit of insight into what Triathlon Australia was doing into Smartabase. So we're going, oh yeah, we know this can work. We're going to make this do what it needs to do. So we bowled through on it. And at the end, I think we had maybe 1 or 2 forms that were doing exactly what we wanted. And that was our foot in the door to start with the whole data thing. When On the Podium decided to discontinue the Canada-wide support for Smartabase, we'd invested enough and saw that the system could work for us that we decided as a national federation, we're going to invest in our own Smartabase platform. Instead of piggybacking in with one of the sports centers, we said, we're going to do it our own. We want full control, full autonomy to do what we need to do and build out our needs as just a sport federation. So in that doing, we had a strategy of what we wanted to do. We put a few resources behind it. I was the champion for it. And then from this point onward, it's been everything we do, we're thinking, how can we educate our coaches, our athletes, our administrators as to understand more about the sport? One of my earliest coaching mentors was a Norwegian cross-country ski coach. And he was telling me a story about the head of the Norwegian Olympic Federation who would go around to somebody and go, hey, Paul, what sport do you do? Hypothetically speaking, give me a sport.
Triathlon.
Okay, so I go up to Paul and I go, so Paul, what does it take to be a world-class triathlete? And if Paul could not answer that question, I go over to Scott, who's his coach, and I give him his pink slip and say, see you later. Your athlete does not know how to be an Olympic champion. That's your fault. So education of our top athletes is so important. It's if they don't know how to succeed at the top level of the sport, we're constantly going to be leading them along, whether it's the sports science team doing everything for them, the mechanic in our case doing everything for them, the S&C guys. They've got to learn to think for themselves and take ownership of their pathway towards being an Olympic champion. Because realistically, if the athlete doesn't want to take charge of their own pathway, you can't expect everybody else to do it for them. It's just too much of a burden on the system. So all that being said, we'll just roll into our, I'm going to call it a less than unique way of working with Smartabase. See if I can get this to do what it's supposed to do. So our builder is Steve. So very often, I'm the guy sitting there trying to stick the square peg in the round hole, and I can't get it to work. So I invariably go, hey, Steve, I got a question for you. And Steve will either go, not a problem, dun, 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 and off we go to do it. Or Steve will go, let me get back to you on that. I need to talk to the other guys and see if that's even possible. So we've got a unique relationship between me throwing difficult questions at Steve and working them out together. I had a great brainstorming session with Steve, was it last week or the week before, where I was getting frustrated with something, or why can't it do this? And we talked it out over about a 15, 20-minute period, and we came up with a solution to do something that we didn't think Smartabase could do. So it's like, hey, we solved a problem together by working as a team. So these unique challenges you get as builders when you sit there and go, why the hell can't Smartabase do this? It should be able to do it on an intuitive level. It probably can, but we just have to figure out how to do it. So I was probably the kid in kindergarten sitting in the corner with that toy, just smashing the blocks in there until somebody took it away from me. So what we've got going, and I'm going to talk about, is I've realized it's an international competition loop. It's a feedback loop where the athletes come into our Smartabase system, we assess them for, point this in the right direction, their eligibility to compete internationally. Then we help the athletes by getting their metrics, helping them do their entries to get into international competitions, because Triathlon Canada controls every single international entry with the International Triathlon Federation. So it doesn't matter who you are in the country, if you want to get on a wait list or start list for an international triathlon, you go through us. So it's a huge burden administratively on the federation. And when it comes down to best practices of keeping track of all of this information and whether or not you're approving an athlete to go in, is the athlete healthy to go in, there's a lot of information flowing in to make those decisions. Then you want to make sure we go through the results. So all the international results are coming into our Smartabase system right now. Every race a Canadian goes into, we pull that information in. It's available to the athletes and their coaches. We do some analytics on it. We present that to the coaches, the athletes, and then we help them set up their next entry. I'm not going to talk about daily metrics that much because I think almost everybody does some form of daily metrics, and we each do our own. But what I do want to focus in on is the bottom bit, the compliance. We don't offer our athletes a lot. We don't have a lot of funding. We don't fund them to travel around the world. We just don't have deep pockets. But what we do have is control of all those international entries. Triathlon Canada also has, because we're an endurance sport that mixes cycling, swimming, and running, the athletes are often doing huge volumes of training. We have a lot of problems with red S, stress fractures, overtraining, injuries, and very quickly our athletes either burn out, they get overtrained, or they come down with an illness or an injury that prevents them from competing their pathway to being a high-performance athlete. So over the last year, we've been testing a compliance model that we'd like to put in place for next year. And under the guidance of the Sport Dispute Resolution Centre of Canada, which helps us avoid legal problems in the future, they've said, you know what, you can't do this year, it's a big change. But you can do a soft launch of a compliance model where if they don't maintain a certain compliance level that you guys have set, they won't get international entries. They'll just be locked out of the system. So over the past year, we've had a compliance meter ticking along in the background, looking at how much they're doing in their daily metrics. And we've got some athletes doing daily metrics in Smartabase. Some of them are doing it in Training Peaks. There's an API being built that connects the two together right now. They do the exact same metrics in whichever platform they're most familiar with, pulls it together, and it goes into a dashboard display. Their compliance, we're looking for 80% daily compliant or 80% compliance over a rolling 28-day window with no more than 3 missed days in a row. So as long as they maintain that compliance, they're going to have access to international entries. Their compliance drops below that, they've got to go to our high performance director with their hat in hand and go, you know what, I'm really sorry, I haven't done my compliance, can I have access to entries again? We'll give them 3 grace periods to get in there, and after that, 4th strike, they're locked out until they rectify the situation, which, depending on how badly they've done, it might take them a week to get their compliance up to 80%, could take them 2 weeks, but with a rolling 28-day window, it won't take that long. But we're hoping that they'll learn quickly that by monitoring and being aware of your own health status, it's critical to being able to decide where to go to do your competitions. So what I am going to focus on to start with is how we ascertain eligibility to compete at the international level. Some of this is determined by our international federation. Some of it is determined by our internal policies. So the first one, when we're dealing with our Olympic and Paralympic athletes, is we want to ascertain what level of citizenship they're at. The Olympics and the Paralympics are only open to Canadian citizens, so we're very cautious with our limited funding that we only fund or support athletes, or if we've got limited entries, because we've got very small quotas for some events, that those quotas are only assigned to athletes who can actually use that event to get international points or Olympic ranking points. An interesting side note, triathlon is one of those really bizarre sports. We have a 2-year-long Olympic qualifying period that involves most athletes traveling around the world at least 3 to 4 times. On average, it costs $200,000 to $250,000 to qualify an athlete to go to the Olympics because of the number of events they have to do over that period of time. So in here, the International Triathlon Federation also requires a mandatory pre-participation medical screening, including an ECG, which has to be done on a yearly basis for all junior athletes aged 16 to 19 and every 2 years for an athlete over 20 years of age. We also have, as a national federation, we've got code of conducts for the athletes. We've got codes of conducts for friends and family. We've got athlete agreements. We've got a social media policy, communications policy. And that's what we need from our national level. In the past, we were seeing coaches at each event going, oh, we need you to sign this, we need you to sign this. And they'd lay out a table with all these policies that need to sign. You go to another event, it's another set of policies that need signing. Then the coaches collect them all. They may forget them in a foreign country. They may bring them back. They may get them to us. And in the end, we just end up with stacks of paper, and nobody really keeps track of it. All of that, we've pushed it inside Smartabase, and I'll show you how we're doing that. We've also got a number of provincial federations that are bought in going, wow, that's really cool. So somebody can sign our BC Code of Conduct or the Quebec Code of Conduct. And we've built little modules in there that if an athlete is flagged with a certain province, their Code of Conduct pops up, and it's all done one-stop shop. So the athletes, just like Mark was mentioning this morning, we're getting that basic demographic information right up off the start, and it's being checked off at the national level and the provincial level. So here, this is our basic login page for one of our test athletes. This is me doing a screen thing, so it's kind of slow. It goes through the whole process. So this is our home page for the athletes. We've got a little system message for all the athletes. We're going into what's called an international competition card now. First thing the athletes have to do is go into their profile, and this is our athlete profile. We get them to put in all their personal information, like Mark was mentioning this morning. They'll identify what teams they're on, if they're in an elite program, Olympic stream, Paralympic stream, and then in the office, we put in whether or not they're national team, dev team. The key bit we're looking for here is citizenship and residency. We do this by getting them to put in their passport information as proof of citizenship. They save their profile. Their profile information is going to be linked through to the next form that we're going to go to, which is called our ICC, or International Competition Card. The entry-level athlete, they have access to some very limited things. The first one is the International Competition Card. So I just want to make sure I can pause this as we go through here.
And this you're having the athletes do themselves?
We have the athletes do this themselves. And we've written out a fairly extensive user guide to go with this. And for those of you who are new to Smartabase, and as builders, in my experience, it takes as much time to write the user guide as it does to design the forms that go with it. Because you have to put on your stupid hat and try to read everything the wrong way and see if you can break the form to make it work properly. And for us, we're working in both French and English as a national federation, so I've got to make sure it works in both languages and then get it off to be translated, get the translation stuff back, and then put it into the Smartabase translation module. So one thing that we've done a lot of is we're using a lot of HTML inside the forms to actually make it look more visually appealing. So it's not just a line that says name and then address, but we'll put in the instructions of what we want the athletes to do. The form that we're using here is pulling a lot of data from other forms and other areas within Smartabase. And you have to update the main form periodically to get the data to pull through so people know where they're at. So we built in a couple of features. First one was we told people exactly where to go to do the save and continue button, because we found that we say, go to the bottom of the page and look for save and continue. And for whatever reason, nobody could find that. So we did a screenshot of the save and continue button as we'd labeled it, put it right in the form, and then put a tooltip on it that if they tried to click that one, it said, no, this is not the right one, go to the bottom of the form. This is a little progress bar we built just using performance, what they call the performance standards. So it's either a 0 or 1 that shows up in these, and if it's a 0, they haven't done the section, it shows up as red. If they've done the section and it's a 1, it flips over to green once they update the form. So as we go through this, it should show the updates. So that's my tooltip, not this button. Go to the bottom of the page and it shows you, there it is. It's the exact same button, but at the bottom of the page. So we've also put section toggles in here. So bits of the form will open, compress, and expand as necessary. So it doesn't look like a huge, overwhelming one. It also explains some of the key things on the form. Why is citizenship important? It's got a little tooltip that pops up. So here, we're going to go in and do a code of conduct. It looks in the athlete's history and goes, hey, there's no code of conduct for you that was signed this year. It takes you over to the code of conduct. It's all HTML code that's written in there. It writes out the policy, gives you all the details, and then according to how we need to do things, it goes, I agree, it's got the date on, boom, and it's done. the athletes sign their code of conduct. And then following these instructions, the whole bit about going and doing the refresh, we go down to the bottom of the page. Got to find the save and continue. And you go down, and now it's pulled in all the data for the athlete. Said, hey, look, we've got data right across here. There's only one step left to do. That's the athlete agreement. They go into their athlete agreement. It's saying, hey, there's no data found. The athlete agreement. The athlete agreement is kind of a cool one because it goes into the athlete's profile and it looks at what level they're at. Are they elite, multi-sport, Olympic, extreme, Paralympic? And it will pull in different bits of text based on the level of the athlete. In our testing with groups, we figured out that it was easiest to feed things out section by section so people didn't get overwhelmed. And also, any of the key bits that we've had problems with in the past, we're having the athletes sign off on every single one of those clauses saying, I agree, I've read this, I understand this. Well, they might not understand it, but they're saying, pretending that they have. So our standard athlete agreement, we just roll through the whole thing. And then a lot of this is just Sport Canada boilerplate. And then right at the end, they sign off on the whole thing, and they're done. Then the last bit they're supposed to do, if they remember to read the instructions properly, they hit save and continue. Now everything shows up as green. Right down at the bottom of the page, they have to pay for their international competition card. It takes them to an external site where they do the payment, and they only get that link which is dedicated to them once they finish the entire international competition card. Seems the video stopped. It's a good time to go. Are there any questions about what I just showed you in that? I know I went through it kind of quickly, but if I take too long, we'll be here for hours. So, yep.
How long did it take you to develop something like that? Like how many iterations did you go through and getting feedback from the athletes to get to that stage?
So the initial stage was we just put everything up there, and I didn't put the sections in. It was just an HTML dump from our documents. I went through, there's a few online programs you can get for HTML cleaners. So we took all that, threw it into the website, did the most basic HTML we could do to get the formatting so at least looked a bit more readable like a real document. Then we did an in-house test on some of our office staff, like our office manager, one of our, losing my vocabulary here, our age group team manager, who are not triathletes. One of them's a parent, so they went through it as like a non-triathlon specific test. And then they came back and said, I don't understand this, I couldn't find that. So then we addressed their concerns. Then we did a test on a couple of parents who were brand new to triathlon, got their feedback, and then, so I think overall, this probably took, to get the whole process designed, including all of the underlying forms, not counting the actual policy writing that went on before that, it was probably 20 hours of builder time. But when you factor in all the gaps in having to go out, get feedback, wait for it, interpret it, put it back in, it was probably about a 3-week process. And this is we put 400 athletes through this process this year, and we only had 4 people who actually came back and said, you have to walk me through it. And then you just open up a Skype window, screen share, and just enter the stuff for them. But at the key bits where they have to sign off on, agree on stuff, it's like saying, I'm not going to do this for you, you've got to go and do this yourself. But we had, I'd say our conversion rate of people who filled it out without any need to call us or go, hey, I'm stuck, to those who had problems, it was probably less than 0.5% of people got stuck. And a lot of it goes back to not being familiar with how a data-driven database actually or website works versus, they're used to going to Facebook or Twitter or, doing a Google search. It's a very different feel than when you're dealing with data being pulled from one bit to another and the need to update. Yeah.
Do you guys, when you sign the document, when you click through and you've answered all the questions, you read everything?
Yep.
Do you actually collect an e-signature on the document, or does that happen when you go to click today?
Yeah, when we did this bit, the e-signature option wasn't available. So now that the wet signature is available, that'll be added on. Or we can actually just lock the form. So once it's signed, the form is locked, it doesn't change. So somebody can't go back and unsign it after they decide, hey, no, now I've paid, I'm going to not going to agree to any of this stuff. But I've got to decide whether or not the wet signature is the way for us to go. Is it absolutely necessary? Because I believe, at least from what I was told, that by just clicking the I agree, having the date and your name on it, that's enough to be legally binding, at least for our purposes.
You mentioned that the progress of the form was tied to the performance standards.
Yeah.
Would you be able to kind of brief explain what went into that? Like how did you allow it to follow the progress of the form?
Yeah, so the performance standards that were used in this one were mostly just to show that progress bar as red or green. So the underlying code in there goes for each one of these sections, like, so this step here, as soon as this text shows up and it says that there's for that date or in the current year that we're looking at, it's got the I agree box has been checked, then it says now assign the value of 1 to this form or for this section. So if step 8 is a 1, then it goes and changes the color. So it's not like rocket science. It's just what I found with a lot of the forms designs we've done is I had to go back and look at the logic flow that was involved in each step of the form and really understand the process of why we were doing different things along the way. And then, like Marcus was saying, is you got to sketch it out. Like the whiteboard at my end of the office looks like, it's just like a mess of things most of the time with like, those huge poster-sized Post-it notes all over the walls with like different sketches and ideas of how I want our database to tie together. But the design process of thinking it through, if you don't do it right off the start and get all the proper data, it means you have to go back and rebuild your forms over and over again. And over the past 3 years, I've had to go back and rebuild it over and over again stage a few too many times that I've finally learned to plan a little bit more carefully. Tom?
Did you have much challenges with legal around the change to that? And
No.
Did you have any strategies to deal with them?
Well, we checked, like, most of the time we just pass it by our CEO and go, hey, can you pass this by our legal guys? Yeah. And, sometimes I wonder how good our legal guys are, but, because I might not necessarily agree with their decisions. I go, really? You don't need to do that, do you? And they'll go, no, you really need to do that. It's like, okay, we'll go back and do it. And, if they sign off on it, and I go, I'm totally fine with that. I'm terrible at understanding the legalities of policies, so I often have to rely heavily on our CEO, our high performance director, and our legal advisors. All right, so this is the entrance point for every athlete to get in is once they're eligible to go to international competitions, they now have access. We add a bit to we give them a new role. When they first join, the default role is called Athlete Level 1, and it gives them that limited access. Once they've gone through that international eligibility, we now give them a role called Athlete Level 2, which adds on a few modules. One of those key modules that we give them is called the International Entry Management module, or I think I call it the ITU Entry Manager. And what this does is we have no way of knowing which events most of our athletes want to go to until they tell us what they want to do. Our national team guys work closely with our high performance director to target a number of events. So what the first thing we need under our policies is every athlete has to put in an expression of interest in an event. Paul says, hey, I want to go and do the World Triathlon in Edmonton. So as soon as we know that he wants to do that, he puts it into his Smartabase account. I get an alert about that, and then we go through, we apply selection policies to it. We then, if he's accepted for the event, then he goes and gets put on an international wait list. The bottleneck in this process right now is Smartabase and the International Triathlon Union websites don't talk to each other yet. We're working on that part. So between the selection process and being put on the ITU wait list requires a manual step from me where I log into the ITU website and I go to the WTS Edmonton and I put Paul on the wait list. At that point, the International Triathlon Union qualification procedures take over based on his international ranking, who else is in the race. When he entered the event, he will either make it onto the start list or he'll remain on the wait list and slowly shuffle up towards being put on the start list. Once an athlete has put in an expression of interest, they then have the ability to withdraw from a race at any point in time. And given when they withdraw, there may or may not be penalties assessed by the International Federation or the National Federation. And in triathlon, you can also use substitutions. You can put a higher ranked athlete on a start list for a race they're not intending to do, and then substitute in a lower ranked athlete. It's quite Byzantine when you start digging into all the rules. It works for them. So I'm just going to show you how the International Entry Manager works, along with some of the performance alerts that go with it. So this is what an athlete will see once they've got a different page layout, once they've got access to the International Entry Manager. Their main form that shows up down here is International Entry Manager. And then we've got some of the other little bits stuck on the side there. All right, so here we're going to go in, we're going to put in an expression of interest in an event. So key things, we're pulling athlete summaries from their profile. We've got an underlying database. Oh, there's that stuff we just talked about earlier, what the different steps are of this moving through a start. It's a lot of steps, and we have to keep track of each one of them to ensure that things don't go wrong. So here we've got downloaded the whole list of international events from the ITU website. It pulls in all of the necessary events. You type in part of the name, you pick the event that you're interested in. Sometimes I have to hit save again, and it pulls in some of the key events. This is our daily metrics link here. It gives you a health and wellness status pulled from the form. It says healthy, uninjured, no evidence of fatigue. Current compliance, they're 100% over the past 28 days for my test athlete, and that's only because I fill in the data for them. In this case, the entry is late, so that has ramifications with regards to selection policies. If you go past that 45-day deadline we've already assigned people to the race. If there's still space, you can go into it. Then we've got the Kelowna event, which is our national championships. It's got priorities for who can get on the start list. It's got a link to the ITU rules, so athletes have to say, yeah, I understand the rules that I'm going with, and I confirm this is the event I want. This says, hey, you're eligible for automatic selection based on the policies. The athlete then takes that information, says, yep. It pulls in a list of their results to show as proof that they've got the eligibility for this event. And it pulls in all of their results from the past, I think it's the past year and a half. Oh, sorry, 2 years. And at the end, it says, here's your expression of interest. It says, you know, Maxine Watts has submitted an expression of interest, blah, 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 in the event. Go and hit Update Entry Manager. When the entry manager is updated, it flags an EOI in yellow. So on the front page report, it's really easy to spot. There's also, and I think it's going to come up here in a second. Here we go. So this is what gets sent over. This is the expression of interest one that comes out. So it's got the athlete's name. It's got the EOI flagged in yellow at the top. It gives a summary of the athlete's name and their date of birth and contact info. It tells you which event they're interested in. So whoever looks at this knows exactly what the athlete is applying for. Details the selection level, their level, what results they've got recently at relevant events. And then it summarizes their, the critical deadlines that are coming up as to when they need to withdraw and when the start lists are created. So this is just showing what the front page report looks like. We've got a section that just shows EOIs, so they're flagged in yellow. I click on the EOI to go into the athlete's, the actual EOI, and scroll through all the information. There's a section that's restricted to office use only. So this is coach access only. If you've got coach access to the form, you can type this or use this bit. So then you will either approve the event or decline the athlete's selection. You'll indicate what date you moved them onto the ITU system, and you put down the reason that they were approved, like what part of the selection policy did they meet. So in this case, like if it was a different event, you type in World Cup, it'll show you the different selection policy levels for World Cups, and you can identify which part of the policy the athlete met. So this way you can clearly keep track of which athletes are eligible for events. It also helps you understand what all your underlying policies are and sometimes how complicated and messy they are. And there, the next bit you'd put on there, update that so the athlete gets a notification that they've been put on a wait list. They've been accepted to the event, put on a wait list. Once they're on a wait list, the next step after that is they get moved onto a start list. You just scroll back through the form, and it's got one area. You put in the date they made it onto the wait list. It sends out another notification to them to say you've made it on the wait list. ITU wait lists are only put out 30 days before the event, so it's, in some cases it's important to get those out right away. so the athletes can get all their travel booked and confirm hotels and everything else.
So I noticed you have, you have a multiple entry capability for the policy.
Yep.
Do you ever have to justify it via more than one?
No, athletes don't have access to multiple entry for the policy. So the only people who would be staff if they need to do a batch of entries for some reason, mostly if we lose data. So this one shows the alert you get when an athlete is waitlisted. It just compresses down certain sections and eliminates others as they move through the system. So it highlights what their reason for selection was. And it tells them you're not on a start list yet, you will be later. And so this one is now a start list confirmed one, and it just says you've been put on the start list, and it puts the date that you're on the start list. And then that's what it looks like in the front page report. If an athlete needs to withdraw from an event, they go into the withdrawal. One of the key things we want to know here is we want to know why athletes are withdrawing from events. Is it because of bad planning? How early before an event are they deciding to withdraw? And, you know, as part of the sports med side of things, we've had an athlete, in some cases, they'll go, oh, I forgot to withdraw. I've had a stress fracture for 2 weeks. It's like, okay, you could have withdrawn from your race 2 weeks earlier, and we could have put somebody else on the start list instead. Or it could be a legitimate injury. I was in a bike crash yesterday. I've got a broken tailbone. I need to withdraw from an event. So we're trying to keep track of why these things are going on, and we want to know who's requested the withdrawal. So it's either the athlete or the NSO. We want to know if they're injured, sick, or other. And in this case, the athlete forgot to book their travel, and that is a real example. And then we confirm when they actually were confirmed as withdrawn from the ITU system. So this just tracks the whole process, every step along the way for us. So what we do with our analytics is we bring in, every time an athlete races, we go into the ITU database, we download their results, we get it in Excel format. For most of you guys, you probably spend an inordinate amount of time cleaning data. It's absolutely the same here. I have to spend probably, for every race I download, it's probably looking at about 10 to 15 minutes of data cleaning to make sure that each of the bits of data is what it should be. It's being flagged properly in the underlying code. We get a lot of time-based data coming in, and time data is notoriously bad when it comes in from Excel. You almost always have to make sure it's a time field and it's not a text field, so that it doesn't get imported into Smartabase as a text field and cause your whole system to go belly up for a while. So every Monday, I go into the ITU database and I download results, world rankings, and Olympic rankings, so that we can help our athletes track their progress. World rankings are done on a 2-year basis, a current period of 12 months, and then a previous period of 12 months before that. Olympic rankings work the same way, and it's different numbers of events count based on whether you're world ranking or looking at world ranking or Olympic rankings. One of the tools we've used here is, make sure I press play, is I've been playing around with the dashboard builder. I really like data and numbers and metrics, and the dashboard builder has been a great tool to help illustrate how that information gets portrayed. So we're pulling in ITU results, gold medal profile data, as well as Olympic and world ranking. So we've made a dashboard that highlights the athlete's name, the start date, the end date of the period we're looking at. It looks at how many podiums they've achieved, top 8s, top 15s, at the 3 main tiers. And if we start at the bottom, this is domestic racing here. This is their world ranking, and then their Olympic ranking. It looks at their total number of starts at that level, and it says you've got 10 top 15s, 9 top 8s, and 1 podium result. So we have to remember that the top 8s also include the podium the way this one was written. If there's no data and I'm doing a sum or some sort of metric, right now it's giving me no data, and I've got to figure out how to get that to show us as 0 so it's not quite as negative to the athletes. It pulls up their world ranking, their current number of world ranking points, the change from the previous week, how many events they've got counting points, and then the breakdown of their points based on the previous levels. So in this case, we see the athletes scoring 27% of their points at the top level and 63% at the bottom level. But if your athletes are anything like ours, there's a vanity part in there where they all want to go to the events that'll give them like a good selfie posing against like a World Triathlon banner, or they want to go to the top level events. But if you're not able to actually score points at that level, it's not going to help your career as an athlete or gain eligibility to the Olympics. So here we've broken down again, repeating the data. 8 starts, 6 finishes, 5 events scoring points. The minimum points are 0, average points 51, maximum 132. Whereas at this level, 16 starts, 14 finishes, 11 scoring, minimum points 0, average 106, maximum 222. So from a point scoring perspective, this simple dashboard can say, hey, at this level, you're scoring twice as many points as you are up there. You know, you've got 5 scoring events there, you've got 11 here. You know, if your top 6 events are going to score, you need to be going at this level to maximize your points right now for your current level of competition. And I was fighting a little bit with standard error measurements and getting them to display properly in the dashboard I have some 0 data in there, and when you're doing historical calculations that don't render a number, it's really hard to do the standard error measurements. So just ignore this section for now. It's part of my playing around with it. And this is all done in the dashboard builder. I think this is like my 3rd or 4th variation on it. I managed to lose quite a few dashboards along the way by changing the underlying data, but every time I built a dashboard, it got easier, it got faster, and probably with 2, maybe I'm going to say about 8 weeks of dedicated, you know, not 8 weeks, 8 hours of playing around with the dashboard builder, it becomes really easy to get this stuff. Here's an example of another athlete. Did I pull through another? Yep, this is a different athlete. So you can see this guy, he's got no data at the top level. He's got 2 World Cup starts, 1 finish, scoring, averaging 36 points. 5 starts, 4 finishes, 3 scoring events at the bottom level. Oh, sorry, no, that was actually just a change in the date period. So you can look at how athletes are performing 1 year to the next year, or if they've had an injury, you can bracket when they're looking at how their points and their scoring changes. We did an interesting analysis on an athlete that changed coaches. 1 year they had 1 coach, they changed to a new coach, had great results, then they decided to change and go to another coach, and you can see their percentages changing and their scoring potential changing as they go through the coach change. Any questions about that section? All right. So in the end, some of the lessons we learned from this were you've really got to understand the process of what your data is going to do for you, where it's going to come from, what the underlying rules are that are governing, whether it's policies, selection, athlete qualification to events, Olympic points scoring, how those calculations are done. The more you can understand about the underlying data, the more you can make it work and figure out the workflow, as well as how you can build your forms to capture that data properly. Understanding logic, if statements, ands, and ors are really important, and they really let you filter through your data really quickly when you're building your forms. And if there's one form of calculation to learn how to work with, that's probably one of the most versatile ones in my experience. And then that helps you with your data flow. And then at the end, you've got to go back through it, simplify it down as much as you can, because you'll start with all these grandiose ideas and then realize that 90% of it is too much, and you've got to focus in on the 10% that's going to work. And then try and make your data really clear so you can present it to the athletes in a way that they're going to get it, to the coaches in a way that they're going to understand, and then to the administrators in the way that they're going to get it.